Ophelia out of Savannah, Georgia, she writes, would Dr. Broggi please tell me where in the Bible I can find information on false prophets? I hear so much in the media on this topic as it relates to the end times.
Well, you might listen to a sermon that I preached and you don't say, I don't want to hear your sermon. I just want to know where the Bible verses are. Well, then read Matthew 7, starting in verse 13, all the way through verse 29. I have a whole message on that. If you go to my series called God's Prophetic Schedule, which is a series on the end times that I preached after I preached the book of Revelation, one of the messages in that series deals with the coming apostasy. And so, God warns in his word about those who are false teachers. For instance, the Spirit explicitly says that in latter times some will fall away from the faith. Now, he doesn't say in the last days, though that is true, because since the last days, since the beginning of the church, there have always been false teachers. And Peter reminds us of that. He said, false prophets also arose among the people, talking about the Old Testament era, just as there will also be false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing swift destruction upon themselves. And so in 2 Peter 2, he gives you a description of a false prophet and what they may look like. Even a guy like Balaam, who looks very much like a servant of God, because God speaks through him, because Balak wants him to curse Israel. Every time he tries, the Spirit of God overwhelms him, and he speaks truth. But as it turns out, he's a false prophet. He's not a true believer. Sometimes God used even such a person as his instrument, and he warns about these false prophets. And by the way, someone came up to me on Sunday and they said, Pastor Carl, we just heard that there are these churches in our town that believe that Jesus didn't die for everyone, and how do you address that? And I said, well, that's called the doctrine of limited atonement. That's the doctrine of a particular atonement, that the death and the blood shed that Jesus shed wasn't for everyone, only for the elect. That's a false doctrine. And I reminded these young ladies of Romans 5, the comparison of one act through Adam, and his one act had an effect on the whole world. Even so, the comparison is through the one act of Jesus, his death on the cross. He has provided a way of escape to all men. And so there's a direct parallel between the two. The Reformed theologian, the Neo-Calvinists of our day, Reformed is a stolen word, kind of like charismatic. But the Neo-Calvinists of our day says that Jesus didn't die for everyone, that he died only for the elect. And if he died for people who are not going to believe, then his blood was wasted. Actually, the same blood that saves me is the same blood that condemns them. And so he describes here rejecting the master who bought them. But 2 Peter 2 would be a good chapter. The book of Jude, its entirety is dealing with the subject of an apostate. An apostate is not a true Christian, never been a Christian. So there's no such thing as a person is born again and then they reject the faith. And we have certain people who go around and say, well, they were believers, but they rejected the faith. And so they're still saved even though they rejected the faith. No, 1 John 2 says if they were of us, they would have remained with us. But the fact that they went out from us indicates they were never really of us to begin with. And so the doctrine of perseverance is not how you're saved. You're not saved by perseverance, but if you are saved, you will persevere. And so when we have this mega church pastor up in Washington, D.C., who had 10,000 people in his church on Sunday morning, he wrote a famous book, I Kiss Dating Goodbye. And now he totally rejects the faith, marches in gay parades, divorced his wife. Some would say, well, he was saved because he truly believed. No, he was never saved to begin with. That's the testimony. And that's what we're speaking of when we speak of apostasia. Someone who has walked up to the edge of Christianity, but haven't stepped over and become members of the kingdom of God. And the Spirit explicitly says in the latter times, so we've always had false teaching and apostasy. And so the book of Jude, so the book of 2 Peter chapter 2, since the inception of the church, Why? Because Jesus in the kingdom parables said that as good seed is spread, the enemy will go out and spread evil seed. And both seeds will come to fruition. And they look so much alike. Don't pull them up. Let God separate them at the end of time. But as we move to the last of the last days, what's called the latter times, there's going to be a growing apostasy. Some will fall away from the faith, not from faith, but from the faith. It's articular, meaning the body of truth we call the Bible. What do? They pay attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons. That's Russell Moore this week, the new editor of Christianity Today. He's a fake, he's a fraud, he's a false teacher. He's lost, and his true colors have come out once again. He's paying attention to doctrines of demons. And he's got Beth Moore on there heralding his false doctrine and a bunch of other false teachers by means of the hypocrisy of liars seared in their own conscience as with a branding iron. And so these are people who are, they march in the garb of Christianity, but they're not true Christians.
Dr. Carl Broggi answers your questions about the Bible and living the Christian life Tuesday mornings at 11 on The Light, 88.7 FM, and online around the world at wagp.net.